thank the McCloskey family for doing this. I'm Walter Isaacson. As you know, I've moderated this and the other governors many years. This year, I've decided we'll get somebody who actually knows a lot about it. Elliot Gerson not only runs our public programs and our policy programs, but has served in both the legislative branch and the executive branch at the state and federal level, and clerk for Supreme Court judges. So Elliot Gerson is going to be our moderator. But I am very, happy to welcome these great leaders to Aspen, especially Governor Hickenlooper, who's been a very close friend of the Aspen Institute, and I think he's the one who enticed everybody here. But when he was both mayor of Denver and now as the governor of the state, has been an inspiring with leadership based on values, which is what the Aspen Institute tries to do. Elliot will introduce the other governors, but I want to remind you that there are a few other events coming up. The Hearst Lecture Series is this Tuesday right here, I think. Is it here or is it in Dorhoesier? Dorhoesier, okay. Crystal's notes say here, but I think it's over in Dorhoesier with Eric Schmidt, the executive chairman of Google, and he's always very interesting. I will be moderating that one. And our Aspen Security Forum kicks off tonight. We have the sort of forum group, but the public security forum will kick off on Wednesday, so come for that. And just as you know, we're a very bipartisan institution. So on Thursday, the 25th at 6 p.m. here in this building, we'll have the Republican governors, including Chris Christie, I think my local governor, Bobby Jindal of Louisiana, Pat McCrory, Scott Walker, and I think Mike Pence. So over to you, Elliot. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Good. Welcome, everyone. My guess is that it isn't difficult for Governor Hickenlooper to invite people to Colorado. I think it's probably not a challenging assignment.
It takes a great deal of persuasion.
I think you all have biographies of four of the governors, but we have an additional special and wonderful guest who's not in the program, Governor Lincoln Chafee of Rhode Island, who is immediately to my right. I think most of you, of course, know Governor Chafee as Senator Chafee, a very distinguished senator from Rhode Island. Before that, active in Rhode Island politics, municipal government, a mayor. Of course, he when he left the Senate, he left the Republican Party, became co-chair, I think, of President Obama's re-election campaign, became an independent, and was the first independent, I think, to be elected governor of Rhode Island. And then just, I think because he wanted to come to Aspen, he became a Democrat just a couple of months ago. And of course, again, you have biographies in your program. Governor Hickenlooper needs no introduction here. As Walter said, he's done a number of things with us at the Aspen Institute. Of course, he was mayor of Denver for 8 years. Governor Jay Inslee of Washington is the newest governor sitting on the stage, although he had close to 30 years of public service in the state of Washington before that, both in the Statehouse and in the U.S. Congress. Governor Nixon of Missouri, former state senator, four-term attorney general, and Governor Peter Shumlin, coming from the Green Mountains to the Rocky Mountains, second-term governor, starting this year in his second term from Vermont, previously in the Vermont House and Senate. So we'll just jump in, and I think what I'll do is start with our host governor and then ask the other governors to comment on any of the things I'll ask them about, and then, as always here at Aspen, we will open it up to all of you with your questions. And I'd like to start with economic development and jobs. I mean, economic development obviously is always a top priority for governors, and probably never more since this Great Recession, which has been one of the worst that we've had in 3/4 of a century. And a governor has different tools from what they have in Washington to deal with that, whether it's job training, education, finding new markets for your companies, tax incentives, regulation. But you seem to be doing a lot of things right here in Colorado. I think I'm right that the unemployment is under 7%, that you've actually reached unemployment levels here that are comparable to before the recession. Our neighbor institution in Washington at Brookings recently named Boulder and Denver as two of the hottest employment and economic markets in the country. So I'm wondering if you just tell us your own approach to economic development and why you think it's been successful here in Colorado.
Well, just briefly, when we first came in, we did what we call the bottom-up economic development process. We went to all 64 counties, asked what their vision was, and found amazing congruence of perceptions. And people wanted government to be more pro-business. They wanted us to get rid of the red tape and the bureaucracy. They wanted better access to capital. They wanted a better trained workforce and a better job of education at every level. They wanted a real emphasis on innovation and technology. We put together what we call a Colorado Innovation Network and do a summit each August. But they also want us to market the state. And in marketing the state, that talk about how to let people know there's not just beautiful places like Aspen and other ski resorts. I wouldn't name them because it might diminish Aspen, and you don't want to dilute the power of a place like this. But the fact was that we were never talking about how pro-business we were. And I think the first step was meeting with business owners, small businesses and also large businesses, and really stressing we were going to hold them to the highest standards, right? If we were going to promote business, because it's Colorado, we had to put the environment first. We had, and this got, obviously with oil and gas, this has led us into many difficult discussions. But ultimately, I mean, right now we are the most rigorous regulatory environment for oil and gas of anywhere in the United States. But it's in conjunction by talking to the environmental community and then also the various industries involved and trying to thread that needle and say, all right, we all drive cars. Right now, everywhere in the world, there's this kind of NIMBY. No one wants extraction industries in their backyard, but we all need the results. So how do we find ways to get at the not just energy, but all the raw natural resources we need in such a way that we don't create risks to our air and our water and our environment? And that focus on pro-business, but also being pro-environment, I think allows the business community to believe. Part of the government's job is to protect the last and least, make sure we protect the environment, but part of it also is to really go out there aggressively and take the friction out of business, right? And that's getting investments into infrastructure, making sure that we have an education system that works, make sure that we have a healthcare system that works, right? One of the things I'm going to challenge all these guys, I mean, we have such a head start, but we are the thinnest state, through no benefit of our own. Just the people that have come out here and want to hike the mountains generally tend to be thinner. But our goal is in 3 or 4 years to be the healthiest state by any measure, right? And I think once we governors are very competitive. Yeah, all right. Well, I've got a little bit of a paunch. It's kind of if you're a skinny guy and you pick up 6 pounds.
Can we bring a scale up here?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I think a lot of that we've worked with the legislature to find incentives, not just for moving large corporations here. We've done a few of those, but really to try and attract entrepreneurs and to again provide them the access to capital, the mentors, the resources that they need to be able to grow their businesses.
Thanks. And Governor Inslee, maybe, and then any other governor jump in. You campaigned, I think, on themes relating to entrepreneurship and job development. And I wonder if you could tell us, now that you're in the office, the kinds of things that you think are most effective.
I will, but first I want to thank the Aspen Institute and John for your leadership in bringing us here. And I think it is an honor to be the thinnest state. I really doubt you're ever going to be the humblest state, though. I don't know. I might express that viewpoint here a little bit.
I'm just getting started. You haven't heard anything yet.
So I got elected governor on a platform of a working Washington. We're going to make sure Washington's at work, and we focus on two fundamental principles that are the strength of my state. The first is innovation, and the second, always looking for the future market rather than just the past. And what I recognized very quickly in running for governor that we have a lot of assets in my state, great topsoil, great ports, great maritime, great history, but the number one asset that my state has is, I would arguably say, the most intensive collection of creative talent in a vast number of fields that you'll find anywhere in the world. And that my job as governor is to maximize that creative power that exists in innovation. So the kind of things I've been focusing on are to help the innovative industries. So I'll just run by the last few days as governor of the state of Washington. 2 days ago I went to Bingen, Washington, where I went to the world's leading manufacturer of unmanned aerial surveillance equipment. And they got started as a three-person company because they wanted to go windsurfing in the Columbia Gorge. And we now have a program that helped them. They're expanding their program dramatically on the shores of the Columbia River in an environmentally sensitive way. The day before that, I went to the Palouse in the southeast corner, where we dedicated literally the world's most efficient wind farm using Vestas 1.8 megawatt wind turbines, 58, most beautiful site on this ridgeline, the pea fields and the wheat fields. And they're doing that because we've adopted a renewable portfolio standard that creates a demand for this incredible service. The day before that, I was talking to folks in the biotech industry, this company called Blaze that has developed a way to bioluminesce cancer cells. So a surgeon can go in and distinguish the cancer cells from healthy cells and just remove the cancer cells. And we have a life science initiative that we're working for to help those folks get investment capital and deal with. And we've got a permitting system. If you read the Seattle Times this morning, we have a new permitting system to help the Boeing company site the new Boeing 777. So everything we do for the last 6 months is getting up in the morning and saying, how do we help people innovate? And we're having some success on that. Now, the second thing we do is focus on the next market for the next decade rather than just that one or this one. And that's why we're focused like a laser beam on clean energy, because we recognize we're going to have to create an energy future that is 80% less carbon polluting than today in the next several decades, and that gives us enormous potential. And on the seventh day, we rest. Thank you.
Governor Nixon, I know that you've done some work just to help revive the auto business in your state and other things. Your comments.
Exactly. I mean, we came out, I was elected in 2008, so I came in January of 2009. My first day in office, I convened an auto jobs task force. Think back to January of 2009. Nobody was buying cars. We went as a country from almost 16.7 million vehicles bought the year before to fewer than 8 million bought that year. So people, it didn't get a lot of attention, but it has paid off long run as we've gotten billions of dollars of investment, thousands of jobs, advanced manufacturing for vehicles in the Show Me State. But we built our economy back on a couple of solid bedrock principles. The first of those was fiscal discipline. The first day I was in office, I downsized government by 800 people, and I've trimmed $200 million out of the budget that very first day. Over my first term, I've made our government have 4,500 fewer employees, $1.8 billion less, and at that same time, we've had record funding for education. We've increased output of all of our test scores of our kids in grade school. We have more folks going to college, and we're getting at how do you make the economy for the future, and that's education. I mean, the greatest economic development tool that exists in the world is making sure that people are living up to their God-given potential by getting the training they need to be as powerful as they can be and independent as they can be. So we have focused tremendous amount of effort on education, initially working on higher education, where we saw the real problem of too many folks unable to get that next degree because they couldn't afford it because the graduation gift was debt. And we live in a country where there's more student loan debt than there is credit card debt. And fewer people able to access higher education because of that. Think of the choice. You're a single mom as an LPN making $35,000 a year, and you want to be an RN and double your salary, and you got to borrow money to do it. Are you going to buy dinner, or are you going to borrow money? So you end up underemployed. Consequently, we focused on making college education much more affordable. We expanded what we have is what's called our A-plus program, so that 99% of Missouri students now can qualify for a 2-year scholarship at a community college. We've also had the smallest increase in tuition in our public institutions of higher education of any state in the country, making them affordable. At the same time, we got rid of 118 dual degree programs, duplicative degree programs, and instituted this year performance funding for higher education. So we've done a lot on all of the pieces to prepare us, but I'm a big believer, even in the depth of the recession, taking $1.8 billion out of the budget, we upped our dollars for customized training by 50% that same year because we are convinced that a trained, agile workforce, people living up to their potential, is the best way to build an economy for the future, which is, in fact, a world economy.
Thank you. Governor Shumlin or Governor Chafee, or should we move on to another topic? You want to?
Sure, I'll just
Please.
weigh in and maybe on how we got into the recession, depression, if you will. And I was in the Senate as a Republican when the big tax cuts came in under President George W. Bush and Vice President Cheney, and I was stunned that the magnitude of those tax cuts that did favor the wealthy, 1.6 trillion, if you remember, and then the spending that went on after that. So how we got into that, the deep tax cuts that I would say favored the wealthy, and then the spending. Not only the war, but we added a prescription drug benefit to Medicare. That was almost $1 trillion. I think it's $800 billion. And then, of course, the earmarks. And so the deficits came roaring back, and now us governors had to climb out of that hole and put out the embers of an economy that, when I came into the Senate in 1999, it was almost full employment nationwide. As I went around campaigning for the Senate in 2000, the biggest complaint I heard was finding employees. And then 8 years later, or 7 years later, we're in a very, very bad recession, if not a depression. So I think there's something to learn from that as the debate continues about the wisdom of these tax cuts and stimulating the economy and trickle down and all the words that are used, just to look back at what happened. And now the way to get out, I think Governor Nixon's absolutely right. Investing in education in Rhode Island, we're seeing tremendous changes in demographics. People of color vastly increasing. I think it was 8% in Rhode Island in 1980. It's up to 25%, 26% now, and increasing. And when it's education is the great equalizer. And you just have to, even in tough times, put the money into K-12 and into higher education, as Governor Nixon said, keep those tuitions down, make it affordable. And then lastly, I'll also add on to what Governor Inslee said in the creative economy. When I got elected, my inaugural address, I talked about marriage equality. And everyone said, what's he talking about, marriage equality? We need jobs in this state. But I think it's related. If you're going to have an open door and you want the creative people, you want the entrepreneurs in your state, you have to have the welcome mat out to everybody. And we're seeing that happen in Rhode Island now. We did pass marriage equality, and we're expecting those young, smart people to be coming to Rhode Island.
Governor Shumlin, let's move to a topic that's come up a couple of times already and where you've become a national leader, and that relates to health care. And we'll hear from other governors on this, I'm sure, as well. Huge obligations and costs, and also now new obligations under the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And healthcare control is something that healthcare cost control is something that you've said a lot about. And Vermont, you set up a system almost like a single payer kind of a mechanism in Vermont, and you also have some other unusual features in your program that you're quite proud of. I think you're the only state that actually requires participation in a health insurance exchange. So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about your vision about the governor's responsibility in healthcare and how you're approaching that in Vermont.
Sure, yeah, I was trying to keep it short because I understand there's a prize for the one that keeps the answers shortest, and I was doing pretty well till you asked that question, Elliot. As the chair of the Democratic Governors Association, something I'm proud to do, you can see why I can keep quiet. I got such a star-studded team. Those that were elected and that one that we adopted, we did pretty well. It goes back to the original question, which is jobs and job creation, which is what we Democratic governors are focused on like a laser. And the fact of the matter is, much like Governor Hickenlooper, I came from the private sector to government. And I know that one of the biggest challenges for me in running a small business, it was the rising cost, I would argue, unsustainable costs of healthcare increases. And the one part of my operation as a small business person that I personally couldn't control, that we couldn't control, was sort of beyond our ability with very few employees, 18, 20 employees, to really have a big impact on cost. So as I went in and talked to business people around the state about, how are we going to grow jobs coming in a recession? How are we going to make a big difference? And I don't want to get Governor Hickenlooper off of his humble path, but we happen to have the third lowest unemployment rate in America right now because some of the choices we're making. But that means 4%, not 7 point something. But 6 point something. But we got Ben and Jerry's, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. We're all set. But the bottom line is, I felt strongly that if I really wanted to make a difference for growing jobs in Vermont and quality of life, we had to make health care a right and not a privilege. We had to find ways to make people healthier by spending less money. And the great mystery to me about Americans and healthcare is this simple. Most of us believe that the more money we spend, the healthier we will be. And when we get sick, we think, well, let's go find the very best, and we're just going to spend, and I'm going to be here a long time. And of course, we all know that that's not really true, that while we spend 300%, 400%, 500% more on healthcare than the people that we compete with for jobs in developed countries, that in fact, our outcomes are much worse. We don't live as long, and disregarding Colorado, we tend to be overweight, out of shape, and not very healthy. So the question comes, how do you deal with that as a governor to make real change? What we have done is two things. Number one, we took the Affordable Care Act, which I would argue is a help, but again, it's a Band-Aid approach to healthcare reform. And we said, well, the big problem with the healthcare exchange model is that not very many people are likely to go into the exchange. So we simply said, any business under 50, if you're buying insurance in Vermont after January 1, you go into the exchange. We try to pool you and get some savings through that process and draw down hundreds of millions of federal dollars to help small business afford insurance, which is, again, a Band-Aid, but we hope it'll help us for a while. However, the real goal for us, and we're going to have this in place in 2017, is the first publicly financed single-payer health care system in America, where health care follows you as a resident of the state of Vermont, not based upon where you live, who you work for, or how much money you have. Now, to do that, you need to get costs under control so that you can guarantee business and others that when they buy into this plan, that they're going to spend less on health care than they otherwise would have, which of course will grow jobs and prosperity. So I appointed a 5-member Green Mountain Healthcare Board, very smart folks that are working together with our hospitals, our providers, our entire healthcare network, to design the first outcomes-based payment healthcare system in America. What that means is that instead of our providers getting reimbursed for quantity of care, which is our current system, they will get reimbursed for quality of care and will be healthier, smarter, and better able to compete for jobs and economic opportunity.
Thank you. Would any of, Governor Inslee, I know you've been bullish about health reform and expanding Medicaid eligibility and expanding Medicaid in Washington. Would you or anyone else like to comment on the health care responsibilities of a governor under the Affordable Care Act?
Well, first off, I'd like to say to our Republican colleagues who are not here today, but I'm going to crow just a little bit about kind of an interesting event that happened in our country, and that is a Democratic president went out and advocated a step forward for greater access to health care in our country and succeeded. And to a person, our Republican colleagues thought it was the end of the states as we know it and the end of the country as we know it. The vast majority they're now understanding the only way they can balance their budgets are by taking advantage of Obamacare. And that is certainly true in my case, where we were able to balance our budget in part because of the fiscal assistance that's happening under this particular health care. And it's been a great thing for my state, both fiscally and because of access to health care. And one of the things it allows us to do is to extend what Peter's talking about, which is to pay for outcomes, to pay for quality rather than quantity, to pay for value rather than volume. We don't want to pay for procedures anymore. We want to pay for health. And under this health care reform, we're going to start doing this in my state as well as Peter's state. We're going to make sure we do that. But I want to mention a general thought about health care reform, and this is a tip of the hat to John about this. If we are going to improve substantially health in this country, we're going to have to do substantial things outside of the doctor's office. Health care improvement in this country has to be on our sidewalks and in our playgrounds and in our school lunchrooms and how we get to work and how we travel and our lifestyle. And John is right. You ought to be proud in here in Colorado of doing great things on this, because there is not enough money in the universe to solve our problems unless we get on top of obesity, blood pressure, cholesterol, smoking, and alcohol. And we're going to do that, and this health care reform is going to help us do it.
Thank you. Governor Nixon.
I should note, John, that Missouri was chosen as the #1 trail state in America. Because of that, the First Lady and I are this summer doing, for health purposes as well as get to the outside, a 100-mile challenge in which we are asking all Missourians to hike with us 100 miles this summer on the various trails. First Lady is currently 14.7 miles ahead of me. And so you can welcome to come do the 100 Missouri miles. I'll give you a medal after 100. But one of the reasons I think we were able to defeat Colorado, as I said to John this morning, this is very beautiful. You just don't have any air here to breathe. It's like everywhere you walk, you're panting. I don't know what it is. But in a lot of ways, what I'm going to say here is counter in progress to what some of these other folks have just said. Missouri is one of those states. I'm the only governor in America that serves with 2/3 of the opposite party, veto-proof majority of the Republicans in both the House and the Senate. You kind of know where this story is going to end. It's not going to end with Medicaid expansion occurring this year in Missouri. Okay. Even though we worked hard and had 65 business groups supporting us, we did hearings throughout the state and whatnot. We made some progress. It's about, but my legislature decided that it was better this year as a public policy matter for us to take $2 billion of Missourians' taxpayer dollars and send them to these other states to allow them to reform health care rather than allow Missouri to do that. But I got a 4-year term and I'm coming back next year, and so are they. But the point, I mean, much of the discussion I had oftentimes was the devolution of discussions about issues as important as healthcare and reforming it and making it better, and it just devolved into this acerbic political discussion. I said as I went around the state, I felt like I was an AA counselor or whatever. It was kind of like a 12-step process. It was like the election was over, he won, the Supreme Court ruled, it is the law, the money's there, now will you consider it? But I just say that while we didn't make success during the end of the session, it ended a couple of 6 weeks ago, we have spawned now committees in both the House and the Senate that are doing reform actions all summer long. We're working with them, and it's my full expectation that we're going to get a lot of solid reform. So I'm happy that my friends are moving forward before us, so we will be able to, as usual in the Show Me State, learn from all of not only their successes but their mistakes so that Missouri will do just a little bit better. A little later, but a little better.
Actually, let me just stay on that and the fact that you're governing so effectively with two Republican chambers, veto-proof chambers. We've had a lot of discussion in Aspen this summer about the dysfunction in Washington and how things just don't work. And so many times people point to their states as the example of how things can work. And I think most states, I mean, there are exceptions, whether they're like you, Governor Nixon, where the other party has control, or where you might actually have the same party, state government seems to work better. And I wonder if any of you, and Governor Chafee, I'd love your comments on this too, given your movement from one party to another and from the federal government. Are there lessons that can be learned about why states seem to work better than our federal government?
I would say we have to have a balanced budget, first of all. That's a good start, as opposed to the federal government. And I don't know what they've said about Washington and the jet travel that has occurred. And so everybody gets out of town as soon as Thursday or Friday comes. And that's my recollection also. Even if you're coming to Colorado or Arizona or Missouri or California, everybody leaves town to go back and campaign. And it's just a full-time job now. And it used to be in the old days before jet travel, people in the hot weekends.
Families that stay there, you'd know each other.
You barbecue together, and you talk some politics and some not politics, but you get to know each other better, and it's a little harder to vilify each other. So there's various reasons as to what's happened. We're confined in the small state of Rhode Island. We have to get along and resolve our differences and not let our partisan disagreements devolve, as Governor Nixon says.
Anyone else? I mean, it seems to be the political question of the day.
I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we're in a particular time in American history where our government in Washington has never been more dysfunctional. And one thing that you don't find in the states with the same kind of persistence is the Tea Party politics. I mean, let's be honest about this. We governors got elected in 2010, and I was one of them, in the biggest class of new governors in the history of America. And with the exception of Governor Hickenlooper and myself and a couple of Democrats that had some name recognition like Cuomo and Brown out in California, a few others, it wasn't a good year for Democratic governors. The same folks that took over the House of Representatives, the Tea Party folks, took over the state capitals across the country. And I would argue that whenever the extremes, whether it's Democratic extremes or Republican extremes, take over, it's always bad news for America. Because to get things done in politics, doesn't matter whether you're in Washington or you're a governor in state, you got to be able to get along with a broad range of ideas and issues and bring people together to get the job done. So I would say that, obviously governors have to get things done. Rubber meets the road. It's easier to do it with state legislators than with professional politicians in Washington. But let's not lose sight of the fact that we are in an unusual time in American history where we have a group of extremes, this time from the Republican side, that is out of sync with 80% of the American people, that is out of sync with the goal to create jobs. They're more concerned about, I don't know what they do, sonogram clinics and ensuring that, we deny climate change and that they're really focused on this ideological extremism that I would argue hampers their ability to get things done in the middle, and that is where the vast progress for this country is made. So it's a unique time in American history. I'm not sure it's so much state versus Washington. I would just say Washington is unusually dysfunctional, and this too shall pass if we get our act together and throw them out and go back to folks who think and are willing to be moderate.
Maybe I could just add one thing, Governor Nixon, quickly. This morning, Governor Schweiker from Montana former Governor Schweiker from Montana declined to run for the Senate. When you have talented people that, with the experience in government, declining to even go there, that's not good. He just did not want to go to that dysfunctional body, to the United States. And he had a pretty clear path. He said, looking to who his opponents might be, and he said, no thanks, that's not good.
I mean, I can't speak tremendously well about other states other than I really like Colorado.
He clearly wants to be asked back.
It's an unbelievably friendly governor, capable, great guy. I almost feel like starting a business while I'm here. It would clearly not be a restaurant. Anyway.
You could go into the oxygen business.
That's right. That's I'll go in the oxygen business. I can speak very specifically about Missouri, about why it's different than Washington. And I think Governor Chafee said one of the things that's important. We don't print money. We balance budgets. We don't just talk about it. Everybody sitting up here is the person at the end of the line that actually has to, in essence, sign the checks, and we don't bounce checks. So that fiscal discipline requirement is extremely motivating, as well as the time frames involved in it, to get people to come together. It's not saying they disagree, but if you get into a world in which, and I would say that everybody up here has cut budgets, and I've been reelected. He will be. All these guys will get reelected. They're really good. The message I would say is that being fiscally disciplined does not hurt you politically. When you look at what's going on in D.C., they talk about cutting something a little bit, and everybody thinks it's the end of the world politically. It's not. People understand that you can only spend what comes in. They really do. And I think that Washington just doesn't understand that part of it. The other part is that I try to find places where we can agree and incent those. And I mean, we come at it a lot of different ways. And then plus you have to make sure that you don't symbolize yourself out of where you are. You have to connect to people at whatever level they are. Missouri is a very diverse state. I mean, I told somebody this morning, during the Civil War, 12 Missouri governors served in the Civil War, okay? And they weren't all on the same side. At one time, we had 2 governors, one on each side as governor. So we have a history of kind of fighting ourselves. We're used to that. It's a little easier that we're not, we're armed, but we're not as armed as they were back then. Are willing to use them directly in political speak. But I think that you have to have consensus around shared values, and then you have to, in these jobs, be willing to there's a book written in the 50s or 60s, I'll make a mistake here with all these literate folks, called The Power of Nice, about How if you know, what's the old thing? If you're arguing, you're losing. We really try to listen, and we try to see what people are trying to say to us, and we try not to rise to their level of shrillness. And I think if you can stay below that level of shrillness, I have found in my years of public service, people will actually listen to you once you get past the veneer arguments. And I think it's really, really important. And I think I'm actually very optimistic about the future, but it's a challenging time right now just because of some of the. I think the other party has a more difficult time than ours. I think that they have a part of their party doesn't, is kind of against everything. So in my role and as in the state's roles, having the fiscal requirements that we have gives us one thing we got to agree on. We got to get to the finish line on that. And the second place is, I think, as governors, we spend a tremendous amount of time in the districts of representatives with them at events, personally knowing all of them. The First Lady and I have every member of the legislature to dinner every year. Every time I go to somebody's district, I invite them, Democrat or Republican, to be with us, whatever we're doing. And I think that's what the states do more of that. And I think that gets back to what Lincoln said about the personal relationships make a real difference.
As I mentioned earlier, it's our custom to open things up to, thank you, to the audience. But before we open it up to the audience, so please be thinking of questions, I just can't resist when I realize that in the middle here we have two governors I can ask a question to, and the others will probably be very happy I won't ask them this question. And that relates to marijuana. The fact that I wasn't asking for any. You both, like it or not, have laws that will allow retail sales of marijuana. It's never happened anywhere in the world like this. How's it going to work, and what's the federal government going to do?
He's the guest.
Great host there, John. Thanks a lot, pal. This was adopted by initiative of our state. I actually voted against the initiative. But we're going to implement the voters' will in our state. And we are doing so with several principles in mind. One, we want to be very attentive to our youth and make sure that they understand when they should and should not be making decisions in their lives, and make sure they understand the health consequences of these decisions, and make sure that we don't see a mega corporate advertising effort take this industry over and drown our children with Joe Cannabis Camel. So we're being very adept and aggressive in preventing that, number one. Number two, and this is important in our relationship with the federal government, obviously, to convince them that we're going to have a very well-regulated, very well-disciplined market so that this material does not leak outside of our state. And we've been very clear with the federal government in regard to how they're going to respond to our state actions. Third, we've advised the federal government that we think this is a case where the federal government needs to honor state decision-making. And we are in a system of federalism that has allowed states to experiment in a variety of public policy, and our country has evolved over time because of that. And we believe that's the appropriate thing for the federal government to do in this situation. In our state, we are well along in the rulemaking process, and it seems like we are having a surprising amount of consensus amongst Republican, Democrat, urban, rural viewpoints about how to go about this decision. So stay tuned. My largest concern about this is obviously our kids. And there is neuroscience that suggests this is particularly problematic for kids using this not at the right age. And I'm concerned about that. So that's the principal thing I'm working on.
And I'd echo everything he said. Washington's done a great job. I mean, it's rare that you come into a situation where no one's ever done this before, and you really are trying to create a regulatory environment from whole cloth. And just like you were with the kids, I mean, we've had some of the top scientists tell us that if your brain's still growing, you're 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, with this new high-potency marijuana, the THC is 10 times what it was when I was a kid. And yes, I smoked it, and I inhaled. The bottom line is that they're saying, and a number of these scientists are saying that it's not unlikely that you could affect the long-term memory for the rest of your life if you're smoking this when you're a kid. And kids don't know this. So, I came up through the beer business, the brew pub business, and let me tell you, the federal government regulates, when you apply for a brewing license, you have to say what is in every square foot of your facility. You've got to have people sign off on your moral character, and we are going to regulate marijuana every bit as strictly. We're going to tax it significantly and make sure that money goes to some of the unintended consequences. You talk to anybody who works with youth, and especially kids coming out of poverty situations, a lot of time, there's all different kinds of kids, but some kids are very susceptible to marijuana. And I don't deny the war on drugs is one of the great failures of this country, right? And I don't deny I voted against this as well, but we are going to move to a different place, and I think it's our job to try and make it the best place we can, and do whatever. If some kid starts smoking pot and they drop out and all of a sudden they're homeless, we want to make sure we have the resources to get them quickly, before they get too far down the wrong track, get them back into a constructive life.
Thank you. Let's go to questions from the audience. And do we have microphones that are going around in the back? Right.
My name is Michael Garcia. I'm from Florida. And I've heard you talk a lot about children, and particularly in the healthcare area. And in Florida, many counties do not require physical education in the schools anymore. And just wondering, in each one of your states, do the counties require physical education? And if not, do you think it's a good idea? And do you think that your state, at a state level, should be doing something to require the counties to do that?
I'll just real quickly say we do require it. It's not universally, sometimes it just takes the form of recess. But there are a number of studies. There's a book out called Spark that's worth looking at based on what New Trier High School, I think outside Chicago, where they can demonstrate pretty conclusively that physical exercise, especially high aerobic exercise, increases the stickiness by which kids remember facts and concepts and are able to think about them.
Anyone else?
We passed a law when I was in the House to require states, and they are now required now to at least consider physical activity. We call it the Leave No Child on Their Behind bill. And it's the one that's working. It's a hard issue for schools because they're so constrained with resources right now. But the evidence is clear that kids do better academically as well as health now. So our approach is we're basically going to insist that independent school districts, and they are independent in our state, at least consider this, at least.
Okay, up to the front row here. Can we have a microphone, please, first?
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm Harry Hempy. The Colorado Constitution has suffered from many amendments, specifically, most likely, you're thinking of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights that was passed when the state was under Republican control, and that hampered the state's ability to fund basic services like K-12 education, higher ed, and so on. It might be better for Colorado to rewrite its constitution than to try to fix it piecemeal with more amendments. I know a lot of Democrats who won't vote for an amendment because it's an amendment.
Do you have a question, sir?
My question is, what consideration should a state make before deciding to call a constitutional convention?
We've had 5 of them. The last one was in 1945. I think all state constitutions, at least my sense as a lawyer, are getting way too long and way too specific. And there's been this movement across what should be constitutional law to make it, in essence, statutory law. And I think, while I can't speak to Colorado in any informed way, I'd certainly be willing to give my opinion regardless of that. But I do think there's this movement of that, and I think that at all states you're seeing far too much detail in the constitutions as far as the exact words. It makes it more difficult than to be agile policy-wise.
Okay.
We're not. There's enough risk. Once you get a constitution, you can't tell what's going to come out of it. So, in the short term, I don't think there are enough people out there that really want it. We've looked at it and continue to look at it.
Stefan, I think it's on.
Stefan Edlis. My question regards education. I think last night I saw Bill Maher as a guest, has the guy that runs Dirty Jobs, Rudy something or other. And it occurred, the subject of the conversation was, yes, everybody ends up with $80,000, $100,000 worth of debt and degrees, and they might end up driving a cab. What can governors do to create a greater, shall we say, sense of worth for the shop floor? Because he talked about all the jobs that are going unfilled because of this onus on the fact that you don't have a college education, you're going to be disadvantaged for the rest of your life. I'm an example. Never even went to high school.
I would argue that in addition to health care, getting education right obviously will depend upon whether we have a prosperous future as a country or whether we don't. And we are in an era where if you don't have some training beyond high school, it doesn't mean you need a four-year degree, but if you don't have some technical training beyond high school, you are destined to a dead-end job. I would argue that. And I would say that wasn't true of your generation or my generation, but it's true of the 21st century workforce. So what do you do? What we're doing in Vermont is investing heavily in early childhood education, 0 to 3, 3 to 5, and seeing that as a part of our continuum of commitment to education for kids. Now, why is that so critical? Vermont is one of the highest per pupil spenders in the country. We're generous people. We spend about $17,500 a pupil. We have one of the most equitable funding sources in the country. So whether you come from Aspen or whether you come from downtown Boulder, you have equal access to resources regardless of whether you come from a property wealthy or property poor community. We did that over the last 15 years so that now education spending is equalized in terms of effort to raise the money. And the interesting thing is that with all of the money that we're spending, and the fact that now there's no difference between Park Avenue and Harlem, everyone has equal access to resources, we haven't moved the needle one bit in terms of moving low-income kids beyond high school. And I would argue that that's the history, the story all across America. So really, as we look at the huge economic opportunities that we have as a country, the most innovative, thoughtful, dedicated workforce you can find anywhere. And I say our best days are ahead of us if we get this one right, not behind us, and they're behind us if we don't. The question for us as policymakers is, how do we move more low-income kids beyond high school? And I would argue that if you invest early, if you get them very early, and get them in good quality early childhood education, the rewards to their educational journey are very, very productive. And if you don't, they won't be. So I think as a nation, we have to start looking at early childhood education and intervening in those early years as the salvation to better results for low-income kids who right now we're failing with miserably in our education system.
Okay, I can't see, but I know our microphone holders can.
Hi, my name is David. I'm from Los Angeles, and my question has to deal with same-sex marriage. Realizing we have some governors on the stage representing states where gay marriage is legal and others where it is not, I wonder if any of you would be willing to tell the story of whether you were always for same-sex marriage or what happened in your life that perhaps helped you evolve personally, and furthermore, as an elected official, what was it that made you change your mind?
I'll take a quick shot at that, and we have governors who've been very courageous on this issue on this stage. You know, Al Gore says that he invented the internet. I am one of the legislators in this country who invented civil unions, and I can tell you that when we got a court order in Vermont 12 years ago, saying that we had to either pass marriage equality or recognize the same rights of marriage equality in some way. And it was a very contentious debate in Vermont, and I got to tell you, I went into it with about this much enthusiasm. And my feeling about it was, as the father of beautiful daughters, but one of the many Americans who didn't find that their commitment to life and a heterosexual relationship ended up working out so well. I was serving on a transportation committee at the time, and I kept thinking to myself, you know, if only half of us who are married in heterosexual relationships are getting across a bridge and the other half fall into the river, why the heck would you want to load more people onto it? And that's really sort of how I looked at this issue. And then it was through the testimony in those very contentious debates that led us to the first civil unions in the country that I started listening to the moms and the dads and listening to their stories about their families and listening to the stories about what it's like to raise kids in a society where your love is treated differently than everybody else's love. And all of a sudden it hit me. And I was like, well, yeah, like what? Of course. Like what was I thinking before when I got into this debate? And it was an education for me. It really was. And I'll never forget dropping, after we passed civil unions, dropping my kids off at school, my oldest daughter, who walked up the steps to school with a very good friend of hers who had two moms. And I turned to her, one of her moms, who was in the parking lot that day, and I said, you know, we did civil unions, and I know you're proud of us, but I promise you that if I'm involved, I will do everything in my power, in my lifetime, to get you the same rights that I had when I married my girl's mom. And we then became the first state in the country to pass marriage equality because it was the right thing to do, not because judges were telling us to do it. So it was a real evolution for me. I think it's been an evolution for the country. And I think that evolution is symptomatic of where we're going, which is that we will this is one of the fastest moving civil rights issues that I've ever seen. And I would argue that this is a generational issue, that the guys that weren't mostly, let's get down to this, old white guys like me, who weren't voting for me 12 years ago because I supported civil unions, didn't vote for me because I sponsored marriage equality in Vermont, that, you know, we're getting older. And when you talk to anyone under, I used to say under 20, then I said under 30, now I'm saying under 50, they just don't get this thing. They go like, were you kidding me? Like, what do you care? It doesn't affect our lives. It affects someone else's lives. If they want to declare their love for each other for the rest of their lives, that's a beautiful thing. And I think you'll see the rest of the country come that way very quickly.
Okay, gentleman here, and then we'll go over here. Okay, oh yes. All right, we promised to go to a woman next, but I've already...
We could use some women on this panel. Some of you got to run for governor here,
yeah,
you know.
That's an idea.
This is kind of a gender-challenged crowd.
Okay, it's Mike going over there, but I did recognize him, and then we'll go here. We have time.
Because governors are doers, is there some kind of a structural paradigm that the Governors Conference can develop that might have a greater influence on the federal government?
Well, you know, that the old quote that the idle hands are the devil's workshop, right? To a certain extent, governors are always so busy. There's just too much stuff to do, but it's always doing something. You're fixing something, you're doing something, whereas legislators are spending an awful lot of time just getting information and then thinking and then voting, which creates more idle time. I'm just going to get myself in trouble. I'm going to shut up right away.
All right, now we're moving to our women-only period here, please. So, yes, right here.
Okay, first woman question. First of all, Carmela Lewis, Denver, Colorado. And John, I'd first like to say I want to be the first to congratulate you into your new position in Washington because I'm sure you'll be going there soon.
That's a terrible fate for a great man.
Okay, and Peter, I'm going to kind of target you a little on this one.
All right, I'm ready.
All right. Last year, I was at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, and I asked Warren Buffett a question about, it was tax-related, a little economy-related. I said, Warren, what do we need to do as far as the corporate tax rate in the U.S. to stimulate the economy? And his reply was, and I was looking for a number. Should it be 5%, 10%? But he never really gave me a number. What he did was he put it back to health care. And he said the problem in the country is health care. So with that in mind, I am a big supporter of the non-GMO products. And correct me if I'm incorrect, it's been said that your state,
what is your question?
The question is coming to GMO products. The question is, in your state, 90% of the people in Vermont want products labeled that are not GMO, and you are not in favor of that. So that's my question.
Hey, I appreciate the question, and I love answering tough questions that get easy. I'm a big supporter of the GMO labeling law. I think people should know what they're eating. I've always supported it, and I always will.
Okay. Okay, there's a woman here in fifth row, unless someone else already has a microphone. Sorry, these lights make it very hard to see. Okay, and then if we could get a microphone over to this side. Just
okay. Elliot, I have a question.
Quick question, because we're just...
As states are dominoing against women's issues, what do you see you can do? What can we do?
Elect Democratic governors. But I want to be, I mean, you know, that's a serious answer. Listen, in my wildest dreams, and I bet you that my fellow governors agree with this, we never thought, and I bet there's not a woman here in the audience who ever would have thought that in the 21st century we would see Republican governors implementing the extraordinary limitations on women's health that are currently being passed in state legislatures and signed by Tea Party Republican governors in this country. It's absolutely unprecedented. It is unconscionable. And if you want to change it, join the DGA in electing pro-choice Democratic governors in 2014, and send a message to America, that party's over, no more tea, sensible, get back to creating jobs, education, renewable energy, the things that America cares about. Don't be telling women how they have to leave their lives or make their health care choices.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Allison Wolf from Telluride, Colorado. So I've heard in the early conversation a lot of concern about kids' health, which I care about. I've got my 5-year-old daughter right here. I have become increasingly concerned about the natural gas industry and fracking and the proliferation here in my state in Colorado, but also many other states, of that practice. And I'm not seeing our country with a very good plan for moving to renewable energy. And instead, I'm watching us build out this massive infrastructure for exporting natural gas that is going to allow the natural gas companies to win financially, and for Coloradans and many other citizens in many other states to lose their fresh water, their clean air, their soil where they're growing their food.
Your question, please.
I want to know what your opinions are on how this country is going to take, where we are today with energy towards a renewable energy plan that's on par with some of the countries in the EU.
Actually, all these governors have been very active in alternative energy, so any one of them could probably take this question.
Well, first off, I'll say the ability to keep Colorado what it is and Washington, all our great states, you cannot leave this to the federal government. It's too important, it's too vital, it's too tough to leave this to the federal government. The state governments, governors, legislators have got to step up to the plate on this issue, because Washington, D.C. is producing bupkis on this issue. And the reason is producing nothing is because there's a group in charge of the House of Representatives that doesn't believe in gravity, okay? And when you don't believe in gravity, you're unwilling to deal with renewable energy. And that's the truth of this situation. So that means it's up to us in the states to lead the country and the world. And we have multiple tools at our disposal. The first tool we have at our disposal is optimism and confidence. I've been working on this for a long time. I wrote a book about this 4 or 5 years ago on this issue. And the first thing we have to solve this problem of climate change and ocean acidification, and those are twin evils. Water in Puget Sound, when my grandson is my age, is going to be twice as acidic as it was in pre-industrial times if we don't change the way we use carbon-based fuels in our country and our world. We have got to say this movement is optimistic and confident in our ability to do this. The people who say we can't do this, that we have to remain addicted to our current fuel mix, are the pessimists. They are those who are fearful of our inability to invent and innovate our way out of this. We are the voices of confidence and optimism as a can-do Americans to get this job done. That's principle number one. Principle number two, we, all of us, need, and we are, I think, on this stage, in our own way, we have all stepped up to the plate to use the tools at our disposal to create a demand for the most entrepreneurial system ever invented, which is the American economy, to develop these products and these services. And we know what they are. Renewable portfolio standard that we have in our state that demand a certain percentage of our electricity come from renewable sources. Incentives to tax incentives to solar and wind, which we just reinstituted in my first budget. Additional state investments. We've been depending on the federal government for investments in research. We got to step up to the plate with our own research budgets. You know, you compare, this is true, the dog food industry last year invested more money in R&D than the utility industry in the United States of America. That's a fact. So we have to step up to the plate at a state level to start making research and development decisions. Then we have to embrace all of the multiple regulatory systems we have to give inducements to clean energy, including efficiency. Because the single most important piece of renewable energy, or the energy we don't waste, it's the negawatts. And Amory Lovins of Colorado here, he's come up with the term of negawatts. I'm proud, you got the thinnest state in the nation. I've got the single greenest commercial office building in the world today, the Bullitt office building in Seattle, Washington. This is a 6-story office building. It uses zero net energy. It produces all of the energy and solar panels on the roof it uses, and it's built with green products. So we all have these tools at our disposal, and we have got to step up and use them now. Now, I get a little preachy on this subject, and I've been told that, but it is necessary because no one else is going to do this if we don't in our states. We are the people going to do it, and we're the party who's going to do it. Because frankly, the other party is captured by a very narrow segment who believes that action in this measure somehow is creeping socialism. I think kids want to have clean air to breathe and salmon to catch and oysters and snow to ski on. I think all kids want that, and all grandkids deserve that. But there's only one party that's going to deliver that right now, and it's the Democratic Party, and it's the Democratic governors, and I'm proud to be in that group.
Okay, we'll have a word from the governor from Vermont, and please, a final word.
I just want to add to Governor Inslee's comments because they're so right on, but I think one of the points that we sometimes forget is, you know, in my judgment, the single biggest challenge we face is getting off our addiction to oil and moving to renewables and obviously leaving this planet livable for our kids and grandkids. And I don't think there's anyone here would disagree that that's sort of a big one. And, you know, as a governor who's now been on this job for, in my second term, I've managed 4 really significant, devastating climate change storms that have just overpowered our little state. And all of we governors dealing with different effects of what we've done already, and we know that the future is bleak if we don't clean our act up. But I think what we sometimes forget to talk about is this simple fact that it's my judgment that as we move from the way we're currently powering the world to the way that we're going to power the world, that it's going to be the single biggest economic engine, job creator that we've probably ever seen. It's going to make, you know, the industrial revolution and the tech boom look small. So when we talk about this as this awesome responsibility, I tend to speak about it as an awesome opportunity. And that's what we're harnessing in Vermont. We're growing renewables like mad. We're manufacturing them. We're doing energy efficiency, I think, probably better than anyone else in the country. We're exporting energy efficiency, hundreds and hundreds of jobs to other places. If you go to Washington, D.C. right now and go see their energy efficiency program, it's actually being run by us, Efficiency Vermont. You know, my point is, this is a huge economic opportunity. It gets back to Elliot's first question about job creation. This is where we need to go as a nation. The question is, does China and India and a few others beat us to it? Or can we be as pioneering on the climate change challenge as we were on building automobiles, on industrial revolution and mechanization? This is our opportunity.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we did promise the governors that we would end at this time. I'm not sure if they're going back to work or if they're going on a hike, but we do want to thank them very much for being here.